Good morning. We're back. I'm Stuart in Fort St. John, and I am pleased to present our first panel of the day. This is the one on attracting investments into energy projects in BC. We've got a very strong panel here, and they're going to be speaking in Fort St. John. And they're going to be speaking in a moment. I'd like to introduce Jeff Morrison. He's manager of BC operations for the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. He's based in Victoria. And also we have coming to us from Calgary with Troy McDonald with Tourmaline, big gas producer that everyone knows. And his role is assistant treasurer and in charge of risk management at Tourmaline. So Jeff and Troy, thanks for being here. I also want to welcome Brian Cox back. Brian is CEO of the Canadian LNG Association. And we're going to start with some remarks from each of our panelists before we get into a conversation. And that's why I want to flag for you in the audience that in our tool here, our video tool, you'll see there's a Q&A. So we'd love to get your questions and just plug them in there and I'll be able to see them and ask the participants them as we go. All right. To start off our discussion about attracting investment into BC, let's acknowledge that I would say, in my experience, one of the silent drivers to the average person of the BC economy is the gas industry in BC, the upstream in particular, because I once did the numbers. I figure that if you see the average annual investment of $5 billion into the BC gas upstream, which is a pretty typical year, that would be equivalent to, let's see, in the Lower Mainland, building a Steve Wynn-sized resort casino, Vegas style, with 3,000 rooms and its own SkyTrain line. You know, that's what you get for $5 billion. Would that be a front page story in Vancouver? You bet it would be. Is the $5 billion that goes into the gas industry ever a front page story? No, it isn't. Residents have no idea it's happening. I think it's really important that word gets out. It probably the same is true in Calgary for that matter. You know, that investment, people are sort of aware. So part of the work we can do through a gathering like this is to be better communicators about what's really happening in the economy. And that's just one example. So we do need to have that industry. It's what drives the economy. And it turns out that it's not so easy to make happen. So we're going to focus on that. I'm going to ask each of our three panelists to, in order, take about 5 minutes to set things up for us. We're going to start with Troy, and then Jeff, and then Brian, okay? So Troy McDonald from Tourmaline, can you give us your view on what we need to understand on this topic?
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. And we're very happy to be here. As you all are aware, Tourmaline is Canada's largest natural gas producer, and we are very proud of that fact. And we continuously try to reduce our carbon intensity and become a good steward of the resource of BC. The events unfolding in Ukraine currently have highlighted the importance of energy security. This is an unjustified and a tragic tragedy, and we send our thoughts to the people of Ukraine. The Petronas CEO stated yesterday, with so much gas being removed from the system, not being available to Europe, so many barrels are now making its way through different routes. The challenge of ensuring energy security has now taken its position again front and center. So what we have also witnessed in the last couple of months, just generally, is that renewables are great, and that is the transition, but to provide stable power generation is questionable. For example, in California currently, they have historic droughts, so their hydro is not providing enough base power, and that's where natural gas comes as a great bridge to satisfy the energy demand. Our view is that the world needs Canadian natural gas and BC natural gas. We have one of the lowest carbon intensity natural gas generated. And we produce that in jurisdictions with very high ethical and environmental standards. Since 2013, Tourmaline has invested over $4.3 billion in BC, and we anticipate in the next 5 years to spend approximately another $5 billion in BC. Again, most of our growth projects are in BC, and it's because of the great resource, the great communities, the great individual contributors from staff and our Indigenous communities. In order to continue building BC's economy, we need to continue to improve relationships with all our stakeholders, including Indigenous communities. As an industry and company, we are never content with just enough. We want the people in our communities to see and feel the positive impacts from our responsible resource development. To encourage more investment in BC, companies are just asking for more certainty around regulatory approvals, policy development. I think I spend more time reading government positions, provincially, federally, on implications to our business model. And again, we think governments should be proactive, and it's not anything against them. It's just we need to work together. I think ultimately we all want to drive down the carbon intensity and emissions from our product. We just have to make sure that we continuously focus on energy security as well. I read this very interesting factoid article in the Globe and Mail today, and they basically said, consider which of the following objectives is the most important: the reliability of energy for heat within a cold winter, the security of supply to avoid extreme disruption caused by geopolitical events, avoiding the affordability shock of runaway energy prices, or meeting carbon emission targets as part of a long-term decarbonization commitment. I think clearly the answer is yes to all of the above. And as an industry, that's what we'll continuously work towards. I'm very excited for LNG potential. And the reason I state that is coal demand is expected to increase significantly in India and China. And natural gas power generation is about 60 to 65% cleaner than coal. If you look at the major emission reductions in the US from 2005 to 2019, that was driven by coal displacement with natural gas. So what we're really arguing is that natural gas has an important role to play as we transition. And we believe that supplying our natural gas around the world is very important. And I think BC is set up very well for that. And we just look forward to continuously developing our relationships and getting projects developed. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Troy. Let's move to Jeff Morrison from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. Jeff, you're in Victoria today, right?
That's right. Thanks, Stuart. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks for the welcome. And I want to say, Brian, great job on your speech. I really enjoyed that. I really learned a lot of things. And I do want to build on some of that. And I think in my comments today, I'm going to talk a little bit about BC's role as an energy superpower, and really try and turn some of that on your head. And picking up on Stuart's view in your opening there, the upstream industry is the largest private investor in BC's economy every year. And most people don't know that. And it's usually around $5 billion a year. And that's separate from the LNG Canada announcement, which was $40 billion, the single largest private investment in Canadian history. But to make that LNG a reality, the upstream investment, it will be hundreds of billions of dollars over 40 years. And so it really is an economic driver for BC and Canada. And within the global context, BC is a G7 nation, but we are, a price taker on the globe for those commodities. And so that's number one. And number two is we have an immense wealth, whether it's natural gas or copper or other commodities. We don't have enough capital in this country to develop that in a way that benefits us. So we really need to be attractive to international investors. And so by way of that, and most people probably don't know this, you wouldn't be surprised, the number one export in BC is lumber. And over 50% of our economy is resource driven. Number two is coal, number three is copper, number four is natural gas, and number five is pulp and paper. So that's BC's context. But in a Canadian context, the number one export by a country mile is oil and gas. And so it really drives the national economy. And so all that's really important. And I'm going to build on a little bit of what Brian was talking about making space in the world for Canadian gas. And there's some interesting data out lately. And so, we have a tremendous opportunity, but we're in a very competitive market. And so, for example, 2012 was the first year the U.S. exported LNG. LNG was someone else's game. We didn't do that. It was an international, and we started that journey about the same time. So 2012 was when the U.S. started exporting LNG. 2022, the U.S. became the world's largest exporter of LNG. And that's a phenomenal story for them. Now, the reality is, and we heard this earlier too, some of that gas is going to be Canadian gas making its way. But there's a great opportunity for us to build that domestic story here and to export that and to really capture a greater benefit of that product for Canadians. And so, and again, building on Brian's point around that pivoting of where the gas is going, we've seen the U.S. supply of LNG flip from a destination typically in Asia in the first 4 months of this month to now Europe. And so while we don't have a pipe that goes to Europe, we have a neighbor who has moved their product, which was only 34% of their LNG went to Europe in the first 4 months on average. And now it's something like 78%. And so now there's this new market. So it's really a proof point to Brian's earlier point that there is space for Canadian gas. We do this tremendously well, and we are a superpower for clean energy. And so there's a great opportunity for us to do that space. And so, I'm very proud of what we do. And I think I would also add, we are building a relationship with communities, but also First Nations. And so if you look at, the government lists something like 40 natural gas benefits agreements with First Nations in northeastern BC. You look at Coastal GasLink, which has a benefits agreement with every single nation along that way. There really is an economic reconciliation story that we should be proud of in that space as well. So, like I said, I put a lot of facts and figures out there for you, which I think are important. There's one more I'll share with you. BC is Canada's #2 natural gas producer. By 2028, BC will be Canada's #1 natural gas producer. We will be producing more natural gas than Alberta. And so it really is an enormous driver for our provincial economy and our national economy, as Brian was pointing out with the opportunities for LNG in their conference board study. Anyway, I'll stop my comments here. A lot of facts and figures. I'll circle back if anyone has any questions on that.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. That's good context as we move along the third part of this. And Brian, you've already been practicing. I hope your voice is not giving out due to all the speaking you're doing today. But, just shifting a little bit from where we were talking earlier this morning when we were giving the broader context, let's get into that inbound investment. What are some of the threads that you're seeing? You've got a couple of minutes.
Yep. Great. Thanks, Stuart. Great to be joining you all again. Hope everyone who's watching caught my first chat. I know you're probably riveted, but again, Brian Cox, I'm joining from the unceded territories of the Katzie-Kwantlen, Semiahmoo, and other Coast Salish peoples, lower mainland of BC. So this is exciting, and Jeff and Troy really set the stage. But here's kind of the angle I thought I'd bring to it, and I know I had some comments today, but we're so disconnected. And I think there's such a disconnection between rural and urban communities and where wealth is generated, particularly in British Columbia. Prior to this role, I had the honor of being the CEO of the Mining Association of BC. So I've seen this in a few different movies on what investment does and how our economy works. Jeff touched on it a bit there on the contributions of our natural resource industries to our economy. And for those of you from the Northeast that are watching right now, there's not a lot of understanding of what you all do to contribute to the economy of British Columbia and the economy of Canada. So I think there's ways to unpack that more. And one of the ways that was done when I was in the Mining Association of BC, we did a study showing where does money get spent from all of the mines in British Columbia. And it showed really clearly that the #1 mining communities in the province of British Columbia were the Vancouvers, Surreys, and Burnabys because of the supply and connections. And so I think, on top of the Conference Board of Canada report that I cited earlier about what we did around LNG, there's a way to take data and connect back to our policymakers and our citizens around the importance of what, companies like Troy's and Tourmaline are doing, what Jeff's members up in the northeast of British Columbia are doing on the daily, how that matters to pipeline and midstream companies all the way through, and why we're developing this LNG industry. Essentially, connecting the dots to all of it through ways that all of us down in urban parts of the province who are looking for, what are we looking for? We're looking for community centers, schools, roads, hospitals, all the services that we want. And we tend to disconnect ourselves from how that wealth is generated. And again, I'll say it, like the key in British Columbia to attracting capital is continuing to work with our Indigenous communities around partnerships, the equity positions. I think we all, in all of business and elsewhere, can help support equity positions with Indigenous nations, and governments have a lot of work to do in that as well. So that is a key component because it's our key differentiator. Our Indigenous communities are our strength. And so I think you wrap all of this infrastructure opportunity, again, around pipes, upstream, electricity generation, transmission, LNG facilities, connecting to mining and forestry and all of that, all laddered into Indigenous participation and ownership. It's a beautiful British Columbia Canadian story that we need to work on telling.
Thanks, Brian, and also Troy and Jeff. I'm going to remind our audience that we have Q&A. If you look to the right-hand side, there's a Q&A piece. Throw us your questions. We need them. But before those questions start flowing, I'm going to stimulate the well here by introducing a thought here. Recently, we've been seeing in all kinds of jurisdictions internationally this paradox. I've been noticing it in the U.S., especially where we have this phenomenon of President Biden having this interesting conversation with the oil and gas industry. I mean, it started out when he was running for office. Hey, oil and gas, we're coming for you. Game over. We're going to be transitioning to this renewables economy, so you're toast. And then he gets into office and he's successful. Guess what? There is a dramatic development. All of a sudden, shale's over, and the whole U.S. energy complex has been diminished. Energy crisis comes along, and Biden says, "Hey, where's all the oil and gas? What's happened? Hey, boss, you told us you didn't want it anymore. Oh, well, things are different now, so we'd like to get that going again." And industry says, "Well, we'd love to do that, except we're kind of busy. We're busy buying back the shares of our companies. We're also showering our loyal investors with dividend money, and everyone's loving it. So why should we invest in something that you are going to exterminate?" Okay, well, how about pretty please please invest into U.S. energy. Okay, all right. And then the final thing, where we are now, the president says, "Great, I'm glad you're doing that. By the way, if you guys should get any evil capitalistic windfall profits, we're going to be taxing those." I don't know. That's a bit offhand, but I think it encapsulates what's going on. Let me throw it out there. Anyone who wants to jump in, do you think that there is a kind of weirdness to how this energy conversation has evolved? Is it just kind of upside down, or is it maybe we're too inside baseball here and watching the details too much for our own good?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that, Stuart, and I appreciate you pointing out that paradox. Where, and I guess I'll provide this context. And so I think we all recognize a need to decarbonize our energy portfolio. But what we need to do is have a proper understanding of what that energy portfolio looks like today, and understand the role that hydrocarbons do play today and will play in the future. And so, for context, in British Columbia, most people, we think of ourselves as a clean energy economy, and I think that's true too. But we look a little different than you might imagine. So, of all the energy we consume every day in British Columbia, only 25% of it is electricity, and that electricity is 98% from hydro. About 25% of the energy we consume every day comes from natural gas. Something like 50 or 58% of all houses use natural gas to heat their homes and heat their water and cook with. And then half of that energy we consume every day is transportation fuels. And so a full 3/4 of the amount of energy we consume in British Columbia is hydrocarbon based. And so the idea that you can move quickly from that world to a no carbon world is challenging. And so we need to be honest with ourselves that these products are going to be in our lives for their foreseeable future, because we do, and Brian was commenting on that, we benefit so much from affordable energy. Our standard of living is so high. we take for granted a hot shower every morning and just driving to work. And, there are 1 billion people on this planet that don't have access to electricity. Can you imagine yourself without access to electricity? And so the demand for energy is going up globally. And in fact, the world demand for natural gas under all climate scenarios is increasing. And we'll probably see a doubling of world demand for natural gas by 2040. And again, getting back to the role that Canada's natural gas can play in that space is vitally important. And so it's a huge economic driver. We need to, and it's a huge benefit to us as the owners. I have to remind everyone, we own that product as British Columbians or Albertans or Canadians. Royalties are a big part of, there's the investment, which is probably the bigger part. But this year, the provincial budget is forecasting $911 million in royalties to this province. And that is up a lot over the last number of years because we've been in a very low price environment. And so natural gas has been around $2, very, very low numbers. Oil, I have to remind people, in March 2020, traded negatively. You had to pay people to take a barrel of oil in Canada. People were losing money. That had a massive detrimental impact on cash flows in companies. Companies went through a very difficult time in 2020. And so to build on your point, people, there was no demand for that energy. And when that demand popped back, not unexpectedly, prices went up. And so, yeah, the irony that you point out, or the paradox, is real. And so we are a price taker globally as Canada. This is a cyclical industry. We had 7.5 years of really awful commodity prices, probably longer. It's only been in the last 12 months that commodity prices have come up, and now natural gas is $7 or $8 a GJ. Now, the good news is the government reaps that reward, getting back to that $911 million. 2 years ago, natural gas royalties were probably only $178 million because that royalty is price dependent, because the resource owner shares in that risk a little bit, but they don't put any upfront capital in. Private investors do. Getting back to that ultimate question of this panel is, we need to be attractive for those private investors. We never risk public money in drilling a well. We only risk private money. And if that doesn't work out, that's too bad for the private investor. And so it is challenging when you have elected leaders who want their cake and eat it too.
Well, let me take that and maybe shift, Brian, if you're okay with it, over to you to take some of what Jeff has said into a question, because we've seen the royalty review process in BC, and there maybe was some degree of political theater to that, but they really are trying to improve the conditions for the efficient extraction of gas and ensure that the public gets its due share. And I think the general reviews of that in the end seem to be, hey, we can work with this. But is it getting noticed? And that's what I want to ask you, Brian. So there's been this process to come up with some new royalty regs. It's meant to, I think, help BC tell a better story. Is it a better story from the perspective of potential investors? I know that you are constantly traveling and speaking with international investors. Are any of them saying to you, hey, Brian, great job in BC. We're so happy you've got that new royalty setup. It's going to make us want to invest in BC even more. Has anyone said that to you?
Yeah, I think, Stuart, it goes back to your point about are we kind of inside baseball a lot on this? And I think for the most part, we have been until what's happened in the Ukraine. And now all of a sudden, people are thinking about energy in a different way every single day, right? Because a lot of these discussions that we have are very academic if you have affordable, reliable energy, right? As soon as you don't have it, it's like, well, hold on, where's my energy and why is it this price? And so you're having this cascade through the world right now. And what's different with the situation in Ukraine cascading throughout Europe is these are developed countries. We've often talked about getting energy to places that don't have energy yet. These are people like you and I, folks, that are used to hot showers and heat and affordable energy, and all of a sudden don't have it. And their policymakers and politicians are in very difficult positions. We're in the same place here with $2.20 gas every day. And again, we're seeing that not even cascade through on inflation yet, because Jeff touched on it, how much of the transportation sector is reliant on hydrocarbon fuels. Like, this is only going to compound. So I just wanted to kind of level set that on the policy side, is that this is the global conversation right now, Stuart, is is countries are looking for affordable, reliable, secure energy. And they want to know that they can get it for the long term. And that's where they're looking to Canada right now, is going, hold on, you're supposed to be in the game. We need you in the game. And now that's our time to be like, yeah, we're in the game. So I think the changes around royalties, yes, are a piece of that, but it's, again, this is a bigger component. And to the point about what I see happening in the energy dialogue right now is this sort of, I told you so, hey, well, look at what's happening in the world right now. I told you we needed to invest. And well,
Yeah.
You know what? It's not an either or. And Troy touched on it. We can have economic, reliable, best in class natural gas and energy industry and decarbonize it. And we shouldn't take our eyes off both of those prizes, because that's how we stay in the game for the long term. So maybe I'll just leave it at that, because I know there's a lot more we can learn from that.
Okay. I think I'm hearing, and I appreciate that you have a lot of nuance in your approach to this, Brian. I think I'm hearing that maybe there still is some work to be done for Canada to be seen instinctively as this place that has that appeal. So maybe just a glimpse into the real world. Troy, if I could maybe challenge you to give us a sense from a corporate perspective. Here you are, Tourmaline as Canada's biggest natural gas producer. What do you think is the investor mentality right now vis-a-vis making decisions for foreign investment to say, yeah, I will put money into that activity of Tourmaline in this place? What kind of questions develop from that? What do you hear on the investor calls? What do the analysts want to know?
Yeah, no, I think investors in the last 8 to 10 years have found energy investments very challenging. I mean, oil did go into negative territory, and natural gas producers have survived $75 AECO, Station 2, and so forth. So we know how to adapt. What shareholders are basically stating right now is that they're worried about too much growth, because usually when you look at the last couple of cycles, capital increases significantly, and that will then too much supply, then of course then the price goes down. An issue we find again is just egress capacity, and you mentioned previously the Chevron CEO and Biden kind of having some back and forth. And I think what the crux of it was saying is we need a little more policy certainty, and we need to be able to get critical infrastructure off faster than what we have done. Like I appreciate Canada, how robust the process is. But when we look at the demand for natural gas in Ukraine and Europe right now, these projects need to get built, and we need to find a way to work together with all the communities and First Nations to get these projects off. Because again, investors, when they look at an LNG facility, for example, it's a very long-term capital investment. So they need to have a lot of certainty. So basically what shareholders are saying is grow, but don't grow too much where you actually impact prices. And when you look at Tourmaline, like one of our strategies, we will be growing BC production once LNG Canada is officially launched. Because again, we have egress capacity to export from. So again, I think we just continuously need to get major infrastructure built, so it allows us to make those capital investments. And again, investors, they just want projects to be slightly de-risked. So that's what they're asking for. So that's how we're responding. Investors, I think, have been very rewarded in the energy space. And when you kind of look at the issue I find is the last 3 industrial energy revolutions since the Industrial Revolution have took on average 50 to 75 years. So again, I think governments have ambitious targets with transition, but there's a pragmatic approach where it says these cycles are longer than what you think to get to zero emission, and we have to do what's best for the Canadian economy and the world. And when you look at inflation, I think Canada printed the highest inflation since 1983, and a lot of that's driven by energy prices. So what we really need is more energy, more lower carbon intensive energy, and we need to get projects built and developed.
Thanks, Troy. I'm interested in hearing from those in the audience who are making local decisions for investment. Maybe you're thinking about, staffing, future equipment, real estate decisions, and what what are you hearing here in this conversation that either concerns you or stimulates some questions you've got? I'd love it if you could put those questions in, because that could really help us drill down into some further meaning here. But I want to pivot over to something you mentioned, Troy, the Chevron CEO. He was invited by President Biden to come and chat. It sounded like it was a little testy, and both parties maintain their strong views on the perspective. But what we heard from Chevron was, we want to be part of the picture, but you're not letting us. So you got to figure that out. And that would really reflect, I think, the mood of the whole industry. And in fact, if you look just recently, it came to my attention yesterday. I don't know when this came out, but the American Petroleum Institute has issued what they call their 10-point plan to restore U.S. energy leadership. And Jeff, you mentioned something that was talked about over the years. I haven't heard it in recent years until you mentioned it, and that is Canada as an energy superpower, or I think you said BC as an energy superpower. But that's almost like a phrase from a distant time when the oil and gas industry has been kind of shoved into a corner in Canada because there's this transition and the world's going to be a different place because of some policies. That hasn't happened. We're back to where we were. All of a sudden, Europe is turning on the coal plants again because it can't get Canadian gas as one of the many factors. If we had the ability to switch on LNG from Canada tomorrow, they wouldn't have to be turning that on. So if you really care about environment, why aren't you accelerating? Who in Ottawa cares about the environment? On the basis of that point, no one in Ottawa cares about the environment, which is kind of sad because they talk about how much they do. So that's our situation. But so the 10-point plan, I just want to go through a few of these. Number one on the list: lift development restrictions on federal lands and waters. Okay, let's leave that. That's more inside baseball for the U.S. side. Let's go to number two: designate critical energy infrastructure projects. I like this one. Why don't we pause on this one? I just like to throw it out there. So the number two. Plan to restore U.S. energy leadership, and maybe it could be Canadian energy leadership too, is designate critical energy infrastructure projects. What is that, LNG plants or pipelines? Let me just throw it out. Whoever wants to take it, jump in. What do you think? Is that a good idea? Should we do it here?
Yeah, I'm happy to go on that. To Troy's point, we need to de-risk these things. And so I don't want to confuse making them a priority with fast tracking the regulatory process in so much as making it watered down. You can do good process quickly, and I think that's important to recognize in that space. But if you are looking at the amount of time it has taken in Canada to build critical infrastructure, that is a challenge to attract investment. And so I think that is a worthwhile discussion to have at a national level. What is Canada's national interest in this space? Recognizing that natural resource economy is so big in Canada, is so big in BC, our number one, so our own economic self-interest, our number one export are hydrocarbons by a long shot. Our number two export are cars and car parts. Number three is gold. Now, most people in downtown Vancouver or Toronto don't think about the Canadian economy that way because that's not the way they interacted with it, to your earlier point. But that is the truth. We do that in a very high-tech way. So don't confuse that resource development as hewers of wood and drawers of water. Yep. High-tech is embedded in the way we approach these things. And whether it's the way you cut a log to get to maximize the number of board feet out of it, or the way that you drill a well to maximize the amount of return on per capital for that reservoir, that is high tech. You don't do that on the back of an envelope. You do that with PhDs and environmental scientists and all of those people. We are a high tech economy that does resource development. And I want to make that point really clear. And I want to build on, sorry, Stuart, I'm running a little bit here. I want people to think about, when I say I think we should be a superpower, and I know there's, an energy superpower. Think about this for a minute. We cannot export electricity on a boat. We can export it by lines, and we can export it, and Canada's grid is north-south. We export it to the States. But we can't, even if we had all of the clean electricity in the planet in BC, there's no way for us to get it to China or Europe. But what we can do is get natural gas there, an LNG, that uses that electricity to be produced. And so whether you electrify a gas plant or you electrify an LNG plant, you are embedding that Canadian clean energy into other clean energy to get to Europe. It is a de facto way to export our electricity, because you can't take batteries and send them to Ukraine, but you can take natural gas that's built with Canadian ingenuity and Canadian clean hydro and embed that in that product.
Does anyone want to jump in on that?
I'll jump in, Stuart, because I think
go for it, Brian.
I think it's a really excellent question around critical infrastructure, because it speaks, and I know I come at this from a different way, folks, perhaps, but I really do believe this is about a brand for our country. And what is the raison d'etre for Canada? So I think this is really relevant to saying what is critical, right? And again, it goes back to this point I make around our LNG industry being the lowest emission and our opportunity to be the helper nation that we always are. You know what? Canadians, we've all been proud of the role that we play and have played as a country in past crises, whether it's world wars or humanitarian crises or other world events. We've always been there batting above our weight. And that's the way I look at what's happening right now, is we have an energy crisis that's not just today or tomorrow, it's over the next century, because we have a role to play. So it makes it really relevant to actually forthface to say, what is our role? And that's where we can start to have the conversation, because again, we run around with our solutions. Everyone's running around with a solution saying, I have the solution, no, I do, no, I do. Well, how about we actually unpack what are the outcomes we want to get to as a country? And then it starts to become really clear what we should be doing, which is exactly what we're talking about on this stage. Empowering, clean, renewable energy, empowering pipelines capacity, which are clearly our highways, right? We need to think about that infrastructure as from a highway perspective. We went all in building a Trans-Canada highway 120 years ago. We need to think about pipelines in that way now to move the fuels of today and tomorrow, right? And so what we don't do is brand it well in Canada to say, this is what we do. And I know maybe I'm coming at it because I think this is important. We need to talk about facts, figures, investment, GDP, all of those important things, but without a brand and a raison d'etre, which the United States is very good at. They're very good at saying, we're the US, we're going to do it because of all of these branding things that have guided us over the last 300 years. We can do the same thing because it's all there. And so I just wanted to kind of frame that out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Brian. Lots of interesting thoughts there. Troy, I just want to on the idea of critical energy. I mean, if designating a project critical means that it would be able to, get to completion more quickly, maybe that's the idea there. Is that something that would be desirable in any way?
Again, I think when I think critical, I just think of the importance for the BC economy. We want to make sure our stakeholders benefit, First Nations communities and so forth. So there's some things that you can't speed up. It's through active dialogue and building relationships. Why I think it's critical is Conference Board of Canada in 2020 did a study. If we had 7.5 billion cubic feet a day of gas export, that's equivalent of increasing Canada's GDP by $11 billion, of which $8 billion in the BC. So again, critical in the sense that we can provide significant job opportunity for local communities. I grew up in rural Alberta, where it was cold in the north, and now I'm in the city and I'm not even wearing a tie, but I understand the importance of our operators, of our staff, of the communities locally, and we want to make sure they benefit. So when I think critical, I think it's critical because of the economic impact, but also because of the coal displacement that we can achieve. So again, natural gas is 60% cleaner than coal when it comes to power generation. And if, for example, right now, I think in the United States and Canada, we have about 11 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas export capacity. If we were to make that to 55 billion cubic feet a day of gas, so that's a 5-fold increase, that's the equivalent of electrifying every U.S. passenger vehicle, powering every home in the U.S. with solar panels, and adding 54,000 windmills. And that's all combined. So again, that's assuming that we're displacing coal. And that stat came from EQT in the US called Unleashing LNG. But I think, again, it's very important to show that we can reduce the world's emissions by the resource that we have in BC because it's such a low CI, while stimulating the BC economy. So I think it's hand in hand. So that's why I think it's critical. It's critical because we'll be reducing worldwide emissions, and critical because we'll be supporting local communities.
Mm-hmm. Recently, we've heard from the minerals industries about the U.S.-Canada work on the critical mineral agreement, which is meant to accelerate a kind of North American space for ensuring that the metals that are needed for critical functions, mineral security. When that conversation about critical minerals started, we weren't talking about a global energy crisis, but we are now. I wonder if in this point number 2 from the 10-point plan from the U.S., when they talk about critical energy infrastructure, maybe there's a little bit of this idea that they're trying to reference, hey, what if North America had a critical energy agreement that we recognize that we need to work together, because there are right now our only customer for gas and oil, so maybe we should be recognizing that now. So maybe there's an international conversation that needs to be had there. Just to shift over, just in case anyone is waiting for the conversation to be about the decarbonization track of natural gas itself, not necessarily just the getting away from natural gas as a way to decarbonize, which I think is the dominant thread, but also the innovation of the gas molecule and the supply chain in order to make it the climate friendly product that we believe it can be. And I wanted to look at a couple of recent trends and get the views of this group of experts on where we are with these. And I'm thinking about hydrogen, big buzz around there, even though it seems like it'll take a long time to get to the point where hydrogen is a big part of that fuel mix. But I'd like to hear about that. What's happening in BC? What's happening in Alberta on that front? Maybe update us on that. And secondly, they're not so much in BC, but elsewhere I hear a bit of a buzz about ammonia. And when we can embed natural gas energy into a product, and that product later is sort of the energy is redistributed. I mean, that's a great way to turn natural gas into a product by itself, not just to make some other product like a widget. And you think of aluminum, you go to Kitimat smelter, they turn all the bauxite into aluminum there, and you'll hear the aluminum people, they'll talk about aluminum is so cool because it represents embedded energy. It's got all this energy waiting to be re-released, and it's kind of the same with products like ammonia. So I wonder if there's a lot of recognition by decision makers who should recognize the value of this. And if not, what do we need to do about that to build awareness of the desirability, assuming it's feasible, of hydrogen and ammonia to play a bigger role in it? And a bit of a technical question, and so I'm not really sure who to turn to. I know, Jeff, you're always talking about these topics in BC because in Victoria, that's what they love to hear about.
Yeah, so I'll start the conversation with the innovation space and what we've done already, and then I'll move into that space. And the upstream oil and gas industry is very innovative, and so the proof point for that is in the last 20 years in BC, we have doubled natural gas production, but total emissions from this industry have remained flat and have actually gone down a little bit. And so there's a really fascinating story in there. We can decarbonize this industry, and we are decarbonizing. We have a very strong track record of that, right? And so that's things like eliminating, and we did things in the past because we didn't know better, right? And we didn't have the drivers today, and that's true of any industry, and that's true of any household. And so getting rid of routine flaring, we're on track to reduce methane leakage from our facilities. And you heard Leah in the introduction, they're a couple years ahead on that stuff. So we're we're taking out pneumatics that are driven by natural gas and replacing them with air, or in some places solar. There's lots of innovation there. Electrifying a gas plant is the single largest thing we can do to reduce emissions in the upstream in BC, but that has to be economical, right? And so we've got that other tremendous resource there to do that space. And then on your points around, so all of that is to say we are solutions oriented. We understand the desire and the need to take emissions seriously. CAP, that is a big priority. As many of you know, we have a new president, Lisa Baton, and she's made that very clear. addressing, have a credible plan on emissions reductions is job number one for us, along and co-along with reconciliation. Like, we understand the need to do those things and to develop responsibly. Number two, just kind of building on the moving a little bit to hydrogen. Hydrogen's, it's like a lot of technology. It's doable, but it will be expensive to build the infrastructure unless we build smart, right? And Brian will probably pick on this a little bit, but there are challenges in that space, right? And the same thing we've seen with electric cars. Getting those peak demands for moving from a hydrocarbon fleet to electric fleet is great when you've got the only electric car on the street and you can drive up and plug in your station at the mall and it's good. But it wasn't that long ago last year where people were waiting 3 or 4 hours just for an opportunity on a long weekend to plug in their car, getting back to that reliable affordability, convenience of hydrocarbons. And so, that story, I'm not casting shadow on that. I'm just saying there are some infrastructure challenges that we need to build out. And that's probably where the story is around hydrogen. Great opportunity. Natural gas has a big role to play in that. We need to both build out the supply side of that and the demand side of that. So that's going to take a little bit of time. But this government in Canada and BC have made that a very high priority, and we're certainly paying a lot of attention to it.
I noticed what I think is the chart of the week this week is out of Norway, where 90% of new cars are now electric vehicles. But get this, the amount of gasoline being consumed in Norway has changed not one iota. What's going on there? I don't know if we can answer that. But anyways, there's a lot of puzzlers in this space. Yes? Yeah. People are keeping the regular cars.
Yeah.
But you reference what Brian's thoughts might be on this. So let's turn to Brian to... do you see LNG as maintaining that dominance as a product? Will it be superseded by hydrogen in our lifetimes? Is it the right investment to just stay focused on LNG?
Well, I think hydrogen in that discussion is really the example of our energy, looking at our energy transformation as a destination rather than a journey, right? And I think when you look at natural gas, because we don't think about energy a lot in Canada, we don't think about the applications of natural gas and how it's used in myriad ways in our society. So natural gas is so versatile. And so we talk about an electricity generation, but that's not where it's going when we are looking to export it. It's going into all different applications within economies. And I think Jeff really well talked about how hydrogen can evolve from natural gas and can be at the center of it. It goes back to natural gas being the accelerator than it is, right? And so we can't not invest in natural gas because natural gas gets us to things like hydrogen and ammonia. And I always go back to our LNG story in British Columbia and Canada, is that investing in LNG Canada gets you to things like Cedar LNG, right? And so we have to invest. These are 40-year plus capital investments. The world is going to need natural gas for a long, long time. And let's remember, Russia's off the table right now. And in a lot of everyone's scenarios for moving out into the next 50 years, Russia had a big piece of that to play. There's a massive gap to be played as well as the demand scenario, and Canada is super well positioned. So I think, you layer that over the whole part about energy utility, like how much energy does it take to make a product? And that's what we need to look at in hydrogen, is what is the efficiency of creating that hydrogen from natural gas or other renewables, and is that where are the best applications for that? And we still believe like exporting natural gas as LNG has a massive role to play in the world, particularly from Canada. We stay focused on all the things we're staying focused on because, again, of that versatility of applications, including in other parts of the world's hydrogen strategies as feedstock to it.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And just to add to that, if I may.
Please do.
So basically, hydrogen through electrolysis was, I think, developed in 1866. The issue of electrolysis currently is that it requires more energy to break up the molecule of natural gas than the actual hydrogen that's combusted after the fact. So what we really need is electrolyzer costs to decrease, or not costs, sorry, efficiency to increase. And that would be a major driver. What's also unique about BC and attracting capital is due to your power source being predominantly hydro, you are allowed to make green hydrogen with those renewables. So that there is an opportunity. I think our view is just that transportation of hydrogen is going to be challenging. So existing pipeline infrastructure, you can only provide about 20% hydrogen content in that pipeline before you get corrosion issues. Another interesting fact about hydrogen is that it burns clear. So you could have a hydrogen fire right in front of you. You would feel the heat, but you actually wouldn't see the visible flame. So again, it's things as a society we're using technology and innovative people to figure out. But as Brian mentioned, natural gas can displace high carbon intensity coal now. And that's what we should really be focusing on if we're really trying to get to our net zero targets as a country.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Troy, could I stay with you? And maybe Brian, this is something you'll lean forward on. I noticed that Leah Turner, when she introduced the Tourmaline, corporate direction earlier in her very good talk this morning, I believe referenced the export of Tourmaline produced gas through Cheniere, the LNG project in Louisiana, I believe. Is that I mean, obviously it's happening, but is it happening as a deliberate thing? Or are there people saying, hey, I'm customer X in Europe or someplace, and I want to get your Tourmaline gas, and let's set things up so I can pick it up in Louisiana's LNG, or are they just sort of buying whatever LNG is sold to them from the port side in LNG, and they don't really care where it comes from? Is there any sort of trace back to the source that you see in the marketplace where that's a factor for people?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's an interesting question because it's a bit of both. For example, if you're a LNG company, you want to make sure your counterparties are high credit and so forth, reliable production. And Tourmaline hits that box, and many of our other producer peers would do the same. What we're seeing right now is for Cheniere, it's basically just JKM pricing and Europe pricing for natural gas that's really driving the demand. I do think when you talk to like the German government, they recognize the importance of the low carbon intensity natural gas Canada generates. And I think it's like we mentioned previously, it's a branding exercise because we are making some of the best natural gas, cleanest natural gas. We need the world to know that if you support our LNG sector and our and natural gas production, that you actually are going to make a meaningful impact with the highest ethical standards, with the most inclusive companies due to oversight. So I think being Canadian is a helpful. Our ultimate goal is we want more LNG export out of British Columbia because, again, it's quite costly to transport gas all the way down to the Gulf Coast. So we basically we saw an opportunity, and what's quite unique about this opportunity, and you can't really do this in sustainability reporting, but you can talk about it when it comes to your emissions. If we assume all that natural gas that we exported to Cheniere, it's 140 million a day, and if that was to displace all of our coal, if that was to displace coal power in the rest of the world, we actually would be net zero on scope 1 and scope 2 just with that. So just showing you the importance of LNG and really how we can make a meaningful impact in the world.
And just to build on to that, if we could get some credit, and we don't need all the credit, but some of the credit for displacing that coal for not just electricity but heating in Asia and China, LNG exports could make BC net zero. It is a solution path to do that. And so this conversation about net zero by 2050 is a really interesting one because it opens up that dialogue in a way that we haven't had before. And so if you think about any company or any shop or anything net zero, even in BC, it would be difficult in scope 1, 2, and 3 to set up a coffee shop that was net zero without some sort of emission offset, because you really have to think about the entire ecosystem of how people got there, how the product got there, and all of those things are so important. So in some ways, I welcome that net zero conversation because it allows us to have this understanding that it's not just about the emissions here, it's about the emissions you can help displace. And if you could capture some of that credit, however you would do that, and it's a difficult question because of the Paris Agreement and ITMOs, and there's lots of international negotiations, we could have LNG exports could help BC achieve its net zero target quicker.
Can I just add one thing? Sorry, Stuart, because
please go ahead.
It's a really good conversation, because when we talk about, and especially BC quite a bit, what governments talk about, they talk about value add, adding value to products. We want to do that. And what Troy's just described and what we see happening is the value being added outside of our country and the benefits being seen outside of our country. And so this goes back to this branding and raison d'etre is, don't we want to add value to provide all of those things? And that's LNG industry is a value add industry. And I don't think we've framed it that way before, very front foot wise. But exactly to Troy's point, with all of the ethical ESG standards that happen in our upstream plugged into our lowest emission LNG facilities, well, there you have the brand rather than just shipping it to where it needs to get to. So there's an imperative piece to that I think we can get, we need to get really live to in this country, and it is our opportunity, because why wouldn't we want the benefit to be seen in our country and for our communities, and particularly for our Indigenous communities that have these opportunities for equity positions and partnerships?
Yeah, you can see the proof point that Troy's described. Can Canadian gas get to the world as LNG? Yes, it can. Troy's doing it. But for your members, Brian, you're speaking not really for yourself here, you're speaking for your members of the Canadian LNG Association. They must be looking at situations like that and saying, if only we could, get that whole value stream, but keep it inside Canada, because then look at all the other benefits would get as just not only as producers, shorter distances. Troy, obviously you want that, you said so, but also, being able to control where the investment is and who benefits from the investment. If it's just the investors behind Cheniere, good for them, but kind of nice if that happened in Canada. It must be frustrating for your
It is, and let me add one further wrinkle to it. When you think of every ton of LNG that comes out of the United States, it's a higher emitting ton than ours would be in Canada. So by us not only displacing higher emitting fuels, we can displace higher emitting LNG from Canada. So there's a double and triple word score from developing our industry here that actually is beneficial from a full global stage.
Yeah.
And I put some numbers around that for Brian. So BC produces about 5 billion cubic feet a day. These are rough numbers daily. Canada produces about 15, so we're a third. The US produces 90 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas, and their export capacity is about, depends on the day, is somewhere between 11 and 14 BCF a day and growing. And so they're exporting almost all of Canada's gas production every day. And to Brian's point, we think we have a better, cleaner product. There's a story to be told there for sure. Capitalizing on that. Right now, the market's not there for paying more for our gas, but one day it will be. To Brian's point, there's a story to be had there. Those cleaner electrons will be desirable in the future, and we need to build that capacity out now so that we are in the marketplace for when that matures, when that clean energy molecule matures. And so now is the time to build that critical infrastructure. And you look at what's happening in Europe, and just building on, is Europe looking for Canadian gas? And anecdotally, I can say, yes, I know companies are being visited by European gas distributors in Calgary saying, can you get us there? Some of them are Ukrainian, and quite frankly, they're telling pretty tragic stories, not just about economic woes, but personal woes. Like the human magnitude of that, the stories I heard, I won't give them, are really sad, and they're real stories. You're not just talking about a business transaction. You're talking about, someone in NATO. Ukraine's not a NATO ally, but our NATO allies need our product, and I think we have, an obligation in that space to provide that clean, reliable, and secure energy to those people. And so, a couple stats for you, though. The European Union hit a record high for LNG imports in April. The average for April was 6.5 billion cubic feet a day. Their daily high was 19 BCF a day. And so that's growing from a typical average month of around 11 or 12 BCF. And so there is this real desire, and I started my conversation with the US is moving their LNG from Asia to Europe, and we're seeing that. There is a great opportunity for secure energy, and I think Canada has a real important role to play in the global space to supply that. I just can't say it more plainly.
Yeah, they must be a little disturbed in Asia that they're losing after having built up the LNG supply chain so effectively with U.S. gas. Suddenly, it's gone.
So presumably the market. I'm an economist. The market's clearing somewhere. The price is probably
right.
going up. They're probably getting more production from Qatar, other places, Saudi Arabia. And again, we can have a longer conversation about where should those molecules come from and how does Canada stack up. And I think quite well. And that's really the conversation about carbon leakage. You can't change emissions by keeping Canadian gas in the ground. That's not a solutions pathway. The demand for that product is international, and that demand will be met from whatever sources you can get it from.
Yeah.
How do we compete to get our better products there? And keeping ours in the ground to hit our targets doesn't solve the global challenge.
Yeah. Recently we heard, I think it was the Japanese energy minister saying, hey, we're going to be importing gas from Russia. We have no choice. They're not going to stop
right now. Germany
gas.
right now is importing gas from Russia, and they would prefer not to, but
they would. Yeah.
And these are developed nations, right? Like, so these are not developing nations. So you add the fact that you've got 1 billion plus people that are looking just to get some energy security. You've just been talking about our secure nations that are looking to diversify supply. Then the need for energy is massive out there. And you're right. Like, there was the World Gas Conference tour was just in Korea, and the conversations there, there was a Canadian pavilion there, and the conversations saying, please, like, we want your gas, like, get in the game. You can, let's how can we partner with you? So the need is there.
Yeah. Well, this panel's topic that we're on here, it's about how do we make that happen, and what is the investment? I know that the representation from Canadian First Nations that want to be part of the economic story was present in Korea. I know that Chief Crystal Smith traveled out from the Haisla First Nation in Kitimat to be at that conference. I'd like to hit in the 12 minutes or so we have left in this panel a couple of things. One, first of all, is the Indigenous investment story. What is that as a component of this? I mean, recently at the Indigenous Partnership Success Showcase that ResourceWorks hosted for the third year in Vancouver, we heard from a number of First Nations, including the new chief of the Blueberry River First Nation right here in the Northeast, Judy Desjardins, came and I think was seeking to explain to this audience in Vancouver what a perspective was of her First Nation. I felt it was in a broad positive direction, and we'll see where it goes. But it's obvious that in the UNDRIP era, no project, no investment really is going to be going anywhere unless at the outset Indigenous partnerships, Indigenous will is explored and brought into this. What are your thoughts, gentlemen, on this component as part of the Canadian inbound investment story? Jeff, do you want to take that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this to that. And I get excited about international trade figures because I'm an economist, and that sounds great. But to your point, and it is fundamentally clear that we need to be doing a better job. We have fallen short, I would say, in our past relationship with Indigenous people in Canada, and I think in Northeastern BC. And I think about, and certainly, I tip my cap to the Blueberry River First Nation. They brought a matter to the court, and the court ruled, and it was clear that we have fallen short as a society. And so I encourage the people of Treaty 8 and the Blueberry River First Nation, the government, to look for a solution in that space. We want to be part of that solution, but we recognize that's a government-to-government dialogue right now. And so we're really encouraged that that is still ongoing. We hear and we understand from all of the chiefs there's a desire to have this industry active on their landscape, but we maybe need to do that in a different way, a different pace, Reclamation is obviously important. We have new rules and regs around decommissioning, timelines around decommissioning well sites that are no longer in use. And I think those are very positive things that have happened in very recent years. And so again, as we move through time and space, our relationship is changing, but I think improving. And to Brian's point too, that is part of who we are as a nation and as a province. We need to do a better job of including that dialogue, and I'm hopeful that we'll do that. It's not an understatement to say it's a challenge right now because we haven't got a really super clear path forward, but I think we're getting closer. And I certainly encourage those government-to-government conversations. I wish them well. We want to be part of that when it's time. We want to be part of that dialogue so that we understand how we can contribute meaningfully to doing a better job going forward. And that's both on the landscape and developing the resource, but also as human beings, right? And personally, there's a great opportunity there. There's, you think of all the Treaty 8 nations in northeastern BC. They all have oil and gas activity on their landscape. They all have mining activities. I think most of them do. Forestry. It's not just oil and gas. It's the collective industrial impact, and we need to figure a path forward so that we can all benefit.
Troy, could I ask you, if you're, say, hearing from international investors, again, maybe it's on a call, maybe it's analysts talking about this, what are they asking? What are they saying about, hey, Canada, what are you doing to ensure that you're where you should be in terms of addressing UNDRIP in your business operations? Is that a question that comes up?
Yeah, it is. And it comes from that ESG view, usually from the groups. I mean, at the end of the day, truth and reconciliation is very important, and we have to make active strides to ensure that everyone benefits from our development. So again, it just comes to uncertainty. Investors more ask about the uncertainty around some of these aspects. But at the end of the day, we're actively working on it. And there's, like you said, local governments are talking to governments. They're trying to figure this out. And again, I think as an industry, we just have to keep on doing better and making sure it's more inclusive. And like a couple unique things is, I think last year we announced a scholarship to Inspire. It's a bursary for Indigenous students. And we just got to do more of that. We need Indigenous communities and First Nations to see the benefits more tangibly. Again, it's working together. It's finding strong relationships, encouraging jobs and growth and opportunity. So I don't think investors are focusing on it as a negative, but more like, what can we do to be better? And that helps your ESG score, but it also allows us to get projects off and to be a more inclusive society. So I just think it works hand in hand. And we're happy to continuously have active dialogue. And again, it's sometimes challenging, but we're trying to get to the right place and do the right thing, all of us together.
So Stuart, maybe give a couple of quick examples of that too. And so in BC, early on when the Oil and Gas Commission was stood up, it was recognized that consultation needed to be done. And so 25 years ago almost now, embedded in an application process was funding for Indigenous communities to hire someone at the band council or the band office to help review and understand what was being asked of them. So that's ancient history. Today, I think we see a new referral process. The OGC is making a very clear, demonstrable effort to respond to feedback and to what the courts have said. Every single oil and gas application now is referred to a First Nation now as part of that new system. Again, the OGC is a good one. This has started with the OGC, but provincially wide now is they've gone to each community and they've worked with the community and hired a local person to be an Indigenous liaison on the compliance officers. And so they actually go out with OGC compliance officers to say, oh, there's a complaint or there's a concern or regular inspection. It's not just an OGC person goes, they have this Indigenous liaison program. So a person gets trained to do that. It's a potential career path for them, but they also come from the community and they're able to communicate back to the community. That's a really great story under, not well known and not a huge financial output from government or industry and DOG, but I think makes tangible difference to understanding. And the last one I'll mention now, or two, caribou have been a big issue in northeastern BC. The industry stepped up a number of years ago. Caribou research was lacking. The industry paid $2 million over 5 years, $10 million through caribou research. That was good. That changed some of it. We learned a few things about what was happening out there. That is now morphed into a reclamation MOU. And so we've taken some federal money, we've taken some industry money, some provincial money. We have contracts out, I think, with 6 of 8 First Nations now doing active reclamation of legacy sites in northeastern BC. And so largely those are old seismic lines that don't have a regulatory obligation to restore. We understand now through that research that those were having an impact that we didn't understand. And so we are making real strides right now to do better and to have active conversations and inclusiveness in that restoration and that economic opportunity.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're getting close to winding up. In a minute, I'll hand things back to Cheryl Montgomery from the Fort St. John Chamber. Maybe just one last question, because I know we have a little bit of time, is just more of a crystal ball thing, but what does the energy workforce of the future look like? I mean, there's probably a bit of a challenge right now recruiting. I know there was a University of Calgary oil and gas program. They weren't even able to bring a complement of students in because they're just, they think the industry won't be there. And yet, all the evidence is what we're going to need to produce clean gas for many decades to come. What's thinking particularly of the kind of people who are members of the Chamber of Commerce? They're making plans. They're trying to get people jazzed about being part of this. What do you think are some of the trends in workforce? What kind of jobs, what skill sets are going to be of the highest value and emerging? Anyone want to touch on that, Troy? Whether that's a corporate thing, or Brian and Jeff as broader industry questions. Anyone like to touch that?
Yeah, I can. I think the trend is somewhat challenging. I talked to the CEO of Precision Drilling. They used to be able to get a lot of rural people to work on the rigs, and now again they're having to go to the cities to find a workforce. But what I would just want to encourage young people, just generally as a younger person in the industry, you actually can make meaningful results and impacts now working in industry versus working in a tech company. I do understand the flashiness of working in a tech company, but the things we're doing at Tourmaline right now are actually making an impact in the world today. And that's what's very cool about this opportunity. So again, we need qualified, smart people. And honestly, a lot of the emission reduction initiatives have been developed by our field staff, our operators. They're actually thinking about what the problem is, what innovative solutions are. So again, it's a very team eccentric approach, and it's a very exciting industry to be a part of. But yeah, we do need more, geology is challenged, the landman aspect of UOC, I think has collapsed or is no longer a program. So we do need more energy workers. So I encourage everyone to continuously try to join the industry. You can make a meaningful impact.
I think that, I love what you just said, Troy. I think that's just an excellent answer. We need all the solvers we can get because this industry has a bright future ahead of it. And I think that's how we need to talk about it. And one thing I'd encourage all of you mentioned Chambers of Commerce and others, we need to also think differently about how we think about our energy industry in terms of jobs. Every career job, every sector has skin in the game on ensuring a strong energy sector in our country. Go look at the Conference Board of Canada report again. We all benefit when we're able to grow the economy, and we need to think about that in a more connected way. So yes, of course, there's innovation and amazing thing happening within the industry, but it matters to you if you're in manufacturing or hospitality and tourism or wherever you are in the country, that we have a strong and growing sector because we all benefit.
Great. Well, I think that's probably all we have time for. Cheryl's back on the call.
Hi, what a great conversation. I knew it was going to go right up to the last minute. Sometimes it seems like a long time, but it was fantastic. So I really want to thank everybody on the panel for taking the time and joining us today. I look forward to having more conversations with you. We're going to take a quick lunch break. Thank you again, Jeff, Troy, Brian, Stuart, and we'll be back at 1 o'clock with Chief Charlene Gale. See you then.
Bye, everyone.
Take